Here's a question, Tim. Does Mike Johnson want Donald Trump to win the presidency, actually? I mean, does he sort of have in the back of his mind that, you know what, I'm going to take half the Republican conference away from Trump. I'm going to let Joe Biden say for the next 6 months. Maybe Mike Johnson thinks, you know what, that way we keep the House maybe, and Trump's not president, and I don't have to put up with Trump. Is that possible that Mike Johnson is thinking that in a cunning way?
I don't think he's that cunning. Hello and welcome to the Bulwark Podcast. I'm your host, Tim Miller. Big show today. Much to discuss. I'm coming at you from Austin, which is why we have this weird background on YouTube where I taped Love It or Leave It last night. So if you're interested in my comedy stylings, you can go check out that. I also was on the Dispatch podcast over the weekend where they got to try to turn the tables on me. So you can check that out if you want. But today, Bill Kristol, we got to do a little bit of a Ukraine victory lap for you. You believed in the great and good American people and the fact that leaders like Mike Johnson might emerge. You were hopeful.
I was hopeful, but I am a little surprised at the sudden pivot by Speaker Mike Johnson. But credit to him, credit to, I think, the Biden administration and President Biden personally for handling it. I was thinking if a little more public pressure might be good, but I think they did a good job of letting him sort of get the credit, do it himself and get the credit, so to speak. Some of those other Republicans in the House, Mike McCall, the chairman of Foreign Relations, I think did a lot to pave the way for Johnson and the threat of the discharge petition. So it came together for now. It's late. We paid a price. More importantly, the Ukrainians paid a real price for the delay. But I think it's an awfully good development, obviously.
Certainly there's been a delay. No doubt about that. So, we don't need to do 3 cheers standing ovation for Mike Johnson here, but it is something, right? I wrote in the Bulwark this morning about the contrast between what Mike Johnson chose to do and the approach of Kevin McCarthy. And we've been through this period for however many years now where the conventional wisdom among Republicans is they've got to suck up to Trump. They've got to oppose Democrats at all costs. Giving anything into Democrats is a death sentence. And Kevin tried that approach, and he was, the leopards ate his face anyway. He was still defenestrated, and he didn't get anything out of it. Mike Johnson now has cut a deal essentially with the Democrats, where now these 4 bills are passed. Ukraine has the delayed but needed funding, and it's going to be really hard for them to overthrow him. I mean, next year maybe they could overthrow him, but if he has Democratic votes, then there aren't enough Republicans to get rid of him. And so hey, that's a pretty good deal for Mike Johnson, and maybe this kind of more. Which is historically, right, Bill, like kind of how Congress used to work, right? Like this approach where you actually cut deals and negotiate and, are collegial, is there a little green shoot here, a little note of optimism?
There is. Here's a question, Tim. Does Mike Johnson want Donald Trump to win the presidency, actually? I mean, does he sort of have in the back of his mind that, you know what, I'm going to take half the Republican conference away from Trump. I'm going to let Joe Biden say for the next 6 months to the Nikki Haley, Ronald Reagan Republicans, Trump is not with you on this most fundamental issue. Mike Johnson says he's a Reagan Republican. He's not with Trump. You guys should support me. He's not going to get most, obviously, of Mike Johnson's supporters, but he can get some Republican votes. It could be a key wedge issue to pry away a few more non-Trump Republicans. Maybe Mike Johnson thinks, you know what, that way we keep the House maybe, and Trump's not president, and I don't have to put up with Trump. Is that possible that Mike Johnson is thinking that in a cunning way?
I don't think he's that cunning. What I really think is that we have the Mike Johnson is the Mike Pence situation.
Yeah.
And for all of my complaints on the sexual mores of devout evangelical Christians, and I have many complaints with the evangelical movement, I think that Mike Johnson was appealed to by Ukrainian Christians and by seeing the damage in the skiff. And I think that unlike Donald Trump, he is not a person that has no, moral compass, no empathy. And I think that he has some real religious belief. And I think he was a Reagan Republican, was kind of faking the MAGA thing. And I also think that he saw that the Democrats were willing to deal with him and that they could protect him. So I think it's probably that, a little bit of earnest, a little short-term savvy, more than a long-term hopeful pivot back to, Reaganism or whatever, a globally minded, conservative, strong America movement. But I'll take the smaller ball win though too.
Totally. I mean, some of the pro-Ukraine activists really did bring over evangelicals, Baptists, and people who've been in Ukraine, either Americans who've been there or Ukrainians, actually, to make the religious liberty case to Johnson and to counteract that the Russian propaganda, obviously, on the Christian stuff. So that I think helped. And I do think it's important going forward. I mean, I just think, it seems to me it's easier for Nikki Haley to stay where Mike Pence is and not support Trump. I mean, this is such a fundamental issue. Mike Johnson has broken with Trump on it. Half the House Republicans, half the Senate Republicans basically are not with Trump on it. Pretty much easier, I think, for Nikki Haley to not go with Trump now. And I think that gives them more of a permission structure with Pence and Haley out there for more Republicans to, if not go to Biden, at least not support Trump.
I agree with that. In Morning Shots today, the newsletter, you take a more of a forward-looking approach. There's been a success here. Now, how can Democrats press the advantage? You urge Biden to maybe take a note from FDR's messaging back in the early 1940s and reference a speech that he gave following the Lend-Lease Act. And I want to let's just play a little bit of it. Let's listen. Let's give people some archival audio this morning.
Do not let us waste time in reviewing the past or fixing or dodging the blame of it. History cannot be rewritten by wishful thinking. We, the American people, are writing new history today. The big news story of this week is this. The world has been told that we as a united nation realize the danger that confronts us, and that to meet that danger, our democracy has gone into action.
I love that. Our democracy has gone into action. What do you want Biden to take from that, Bill?
I think he should probably give a major speech now. I mean, FDR, this is pointed out to me by a friend who knows this stuff much better than I. Lend-Lease passed on March 11th, 1941. A very important, obviously not gesture, very important way of supporting Britain and others standing up to a few other nations standing up to the Nazis. And FDR signed it that night. He gave this speech on March 15th, 4 days later. And the speech was pretty famous at the time, I gather, and was kind of a real statement that we are in this. We're not backing away. We're the arsenal of democracy. Obviously, U.S. troops were not committed. But it's very, in that way, quite comparable to the Ukraine situation. We're all in with our allies, short of providing troops. And that was, I think, an important signal and an important statement by FDR, kind of a moving speech if you listen to the whole thing or read it. And President Biden, I think one criticism that's somewhat fair is that he hasn't fully made the case for Ukraine and the broader case for American foreign policy in the 21st century, the contrast to Trump. He's done it at times, but it's time to lay that out. And this is a good time to take advantage of the victory and really bring home to people this fundamental distinction. Everyone says voters don't vote on foreign policy, but I don't know. Some chunk of voters are going to say this is just a 180-degree difference between the two of them. And here's Biden with the support of Mike Pence and Mike Johnson and Nikki Haley on this issue. And aren't we closer to him and aren't we more comfortable with him as president than Donald Trump?
Yeah, and this coalition government, that's really, and look, if you look at what happened, essentially, you have basically the entire Democratic Party, with the exception of some votes on Israel, which we'll get to next, united on this, with about half of the Republican Party. You wish it would be more than half, but about half. That was the coalition that got this passed. And Biden needs to speak to that full group, I think, going ahead to the election in November and say, we can responsibly co-govern together. By the way, that's the coalition that got infrastructure passed and chips passed. And you can advance a broader story that really isolates, pun intended, Donald Trump, right? And the kind of isolationist wing of the party as being like very extreme and irresponsible and like an outlier, I guess, at this point. You have to make that case to people.
You do, and there'll be a little Democratic resistance because it slightly cuts against the every Republican in Washington needs to be thrown out and every Republican House member needs to be defeated, because here's Biden will be saying, well, in this case, half of them have behaved responsibly. And he'll praise, obviously, Speaker Johnson if he gives such a speech. But I think that's the price you have to pay. It's for this. Ultimately, those races will have their own dynamic. And it's much more important to capitalize on this moment and really try to marginalize Trump, try to marginalize MAGA. I mean, he can't really be marginalized. He's the nominee of the party, but still nominee of a party with only half the party supporting you on a major fundamental issue. That's not as strong as being the nominee of the party with the whole party in lockstep behind you.
Hey, JVL, it's been months since I've seen you without a screen intermediary. I'm just dying to lick your face and put my hands on you. And so are you going to come do some public events with us and be among the people?
Human contact? Yes. Yes, I'm going to do it. I'm coming out of the house. I'm leaving the basement for 2 days. May 1st in Philadelphia and May 15th in Washington, D.C.
This will be the first Bulwark event where we encourage jeering, because it's Philly, people, so jeer us.
Yes.
May 1st.
If we have a bad show, I expect the Philly crowd to boo us.
Please. Or anyway, even if it's a good show, boo us anyway. We deserve it. May 1st in Philly, May 15th, 6 and I Synagogue in Washington, D.C. Come hang out. Go to thebulwark.com/events to get your tickets. Thebulwark.com/events. And JVL, I just can't wait to get all up on you. Okay, on to the Israel side of things. A lot of protests this weekend, most notably at Columbia University. Some pretty horrific scene. Death to Jews being chanted by these protesters. Now it's kind of like it's a little bit analogous to the Charlottesville situation in that, like, it's not 100% clear. Like, these might be agitators, right? Like, how are they Columbia students? A lot of this is happening outside the university. These massive protests, Jewish students on campus feeling unsafe, feeling like they need to leave campus, given the nature of the shout. Some of these chants are like literally pro-Hamas, like burn Tel Aviv to the ground type rhetoric. Pretty alarming. There's some examples of this also on other campuses. What can be done about this? What are your impressions? What should the Biden administration be doing, if anything?
I think the main thing that can be done is colleges and universities have to enforce their rules or create new rules against certain types of demonstrations, against encampments on campus, against microphones and bullhorns being used within, I'm making this up, obviously 100 yards of the library or classroom buildings or dorms. I mean, there are lots of ways to damp this down that don't require, changing the minds of the 100 students who were involved or even being able fully to control the people who gather outside the gates of the campus. Though I think you could also control a little bit what's happening right outside the campus in coordination with the police. The colleges and universities have been just too timid, I think. And these are college campuses. They're supposed to be places for fun and for study and a certain amount of rule-abiding protest, obviously, but not the scenes you see at Columbia and elsewhere. That's not a college campus. And that, I think, it's very legitimate for colleges to crack down on that. And they don't have to begin every statement by saying we honor and respect everyone's right to protest. And fine, of course, people have a right to protest, but they don't have a right to take over a huge chunk of a college campus with microphones and bullhorns and encampments and then harass other students or make it easier for outsiders to come and harass other students with whom they disagree.
Yeah. Biden administration did put out a statement this weekend. I looked and I did a quick scan this morning. Some of the Democrats have Adam Schiff and some other Jackie Rose, and I saw there were some other Democratic senators. But a very forceful, I do think a fair critique of the Democrats is there should be a forceful criticism of this that is equal in tone and measure to what the type of criticism would be if there were other minority groups that were being shouted down in college campuses like this. And I think that Biden is doing the right thing. But, to me, I think that's kind of the Democrats' responsibility here, is to speak very clearly against this. And you've seen some of it, but I think more is more in this case.
Yeah, I agree. And I do think it's the right thing to do. It really is the right thing to do, I think, for the sake of college students, for the sake of Jewish students and Jews, honestly, in America generally, but this is for the sake of all minorities, that this won't be tolerated. And politically, I do think it would help Biden. I think it's not quite fair But the impression, I just see so many people I know even saying, well, this is the Democratic Party. Well, no, that's not the Democratic Party. That's a bunch of left-wing protesters who hate what Biden's done in it by standing with Israel. But you know how it is. You do need to go the extra mile almost to distance yourself from the people who can semi-plausibly be said to be your friends, right? And we do ask that of Republicans sometimes. Usually we, of course, get no positive response at all, criticize Trump for having dinner with some neo-Nazi. Sure. But in this case, it would be wise, I think, for the administration and other Democrats to go the extra step and really making clear this is not part of the liberalism they stand for.
Totally agree. Okay, short one this week, Bill, because I want to spend some time with Tom Mauser. Thanks for doing this. We'll be back next Monday, as always.